Welcome, everyone, to the Clip and Clarity podcast, where we demystify the filmmaking process. I'm Nate, your host from Taproot Pictures, and today we have two awesome special guests, Annie and Bryan. Welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to start just from asking each of you, how did you get where you are? And maybe we'll start with Annie, and maybe just give us the abbreviated version of how you begun to do what you do now.
You just don't want me to take 40 minutes, do you?
We'll have her set the trend and then you follow her.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Do as I do, Bryan.
Okay, I'll try.
As always. I went to school for theater, actually. And so I love storytelling since I was a 5-year-old kid. Had no idea what production was when I went to college. I think had I known, I would have probably tried to study it in some form, but was able to pursue a degree in theater and then found myself at an advertising agency, of all places, after college. Started out in client management. So I was an associate account executive, and then I was an account executive, and love it, love agency life to a degree. But I realized pretty quickly, like a year out of college, that account management just wasn't enough creativity for me. I love the client management side of things, and I think I'm talented in it, but I need to also be more involved in the creative. And I saw the production team, it was a team of female producers at my agency, traveling. They were moving gear around, had no idea what they did. I cold emailed the EP and said, "Hey, I'm Annie. Can I be a fly on the wall the next time you have a shoot?" She's like, "Sure thing. We have one tomorrow. Here's the address. Show up." So I took a taxi to this studio.
Where was this in? Like what city?
Is in Chicago.
Okay.
Yeah. Office was on Michigan Avenue, right across the street from Millennium Park.
Is that where you grew up?
I grew up in Orange County, California. So made my way out to the Midwest for college and then just stuck around.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Just a little aside.
Yeah, no, it's great.
That's great.
It gives you a sense of place. I go to this studio and they take a break in filming. I'm just totally fascinated. And the EP is talking to our chief creative officer. And they're talking about how video is growing. It's becoming a thing, right? And they're going to need to hire more people. They don't have enough producers. And I just had one of those like light bulb moments, best decision of my life. I just interrupted their conversation and said, "Hey, you should hire me." And they both kind of looked at me like, "Wait, what? Who are you?" And they're like, "You're going to have to change your careers if you work for us." And I was like, "Yeah, that's the point. I want to change my career. I don't know what that means, but that's what I want to do." So after pestering them for about 4 months, they created a role on their team for me as the production coordinator. And I just basically learned under these 3 female producers. They taught me everything I know and came up as an agency producer before actually deciding to go out on my own and try line producing as well.
That's great.
Yeah.
So how long were you there in that role before you went freelance?
I was at that agency for a total of 6 years and then decided to try freelancing.
How long ago was that?
I was a year and a half ago.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a bunch of questions, but we'll give Bryan an opportunity to intro himself and explain how he got into producing.
Well, you've got a little Lego piece here, and that's pretty apropos for what I'm going to say, because I started with Legos. That's why I started. I was playing as a 6-year-old kid, with my Legos, and it was always film. I don't know why. I don't know what it was that really attracted me to it, but that's all it was. That was the goal. It was never, cops and robbers or any of those, kind of traditional things. It was very much just production, and playing with, what I thought was a camera. I kind of created my own little Lego camera, and I just had this love for cinema, and I didn't really know what that meant at that time, of course. I was really lucky. At 15, I was able to get an internship at a television network, and I probably shouldn't have, but I had a little inside track there, and I was able to do that. And essentially, I was a production assistant. I was pushing road cases around and pulling cables and, doing all the kind of low-end tier stuff. And that was in the live television realm. So I had no concept really outside of that realm. So I'd done a little bit of editing as a kid, just being kind of a computer geek. I'd played around with editing systems and that kind of thing. So I had a somewhat of a basic knowledge base, but in the live television realm, started working with this road crew that would essentially go around and film, every weekend, different events and things going on. And one day there was a camera that was left unmanned, and I jumped on, and kind of the rest is history. So, worked my way up through camera department, different various positions, getting more specialized as time went on, since I thought that would help me get hired more. And then at that point, there was a point in college when I decided to jump ship and start my own kind of production entity. And that went on for a little while with some friends, and eventually ended up freelancing. And, when you first start off, you kind of wear all of the hats, and you are shooting and editing and producing and directing and all the things. And being kind of a gearhead that I am, I was really excited about having my hands in the pot, and every element of it or facet of it. But over time, I realized that there are people that are really gifted, in those individual areas, DPs and directors and, gaffers, et cetera. And if I partner with those people, the kind of creation or the content that I'm creating would turn out so much better than anything that I would have done just on my own. And I tried to figure out, well, what does that mean for me, And that's when I landed in producing, and fell in love with it. Wouldn't want to do anything else.
What is a producer? What does a producer do?
If I had to say, it would be the person that's told, here's the vision, here's the money, make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
Producer has to make it happen. So you have to find the right people, spend the money in the right way, pull together the logistics. You're kind of the, what did you say, the general manager of the team?
Yeah. They're the ultimate collaborator. They're the people that pull all the pieces together and make it function.
It's like putting the right Legos on your your Lego set. Yeah,
Exactly.
I mean, that's cool. I think that it's interesting that at some point you decided that you could best serve the
Mm-hmm.
vision by stepping away from being the one pressing
Mm-hmm.
the buttons.
For sure.
Where did that come from, your passion for realizing like, I can make this more successful by being the one like kind of puppet mastering the whole thing?
It was actually really difficult because, I did enjoy all of those elements so much. And I have a visual eye, and, as I said before, I love playing with the gear and all of the, elements that make a production happen. I really enjoy it. And it wasn't just me, even though I could tell that I needed to make that transition, that jump. It was a lot of friends as well that are in the industry and were around me at the time that helped me see that as well. But yeah, it was definitely the right move, and it was a difficult jump, but once I made it, I felt like I was home.
Yeah. And how is that different than a lot of the people watching might understand what it means? I mean, we had Max on a couple episodes ago, who is an agency producer, and we talked about what that life is like. How is line producing? I mean, the word producer is just such a misunderstood word. Even with different industries, you have that word pop up again. But how is being like a line producer different than an agency producer, or maybe what someone's perception of that word would be?
We like lines.
No, I mean, traditionally line producer, it comes from the line items on a budget. Yeah. So you are primarily responsible for making sure that the budget is spent the way it needs to be spent. You're saving the most amount of money you can, and you're being efficient, right? As both a line producer and an agency producer myself, I would say both kinds of producing are concerned with the budget, but different aspects of the budget. So as an agency producer, I see the overall numbers. I know how much the client is not just paying the production company, but they're also how much they're paying the agency. So I'm looking at utilization of agency members. Have my creative team spent enough hours so we can charge the client, X amount of money? Are they going over those hours? But then I also care about how much money I'm giving to the production company, and I'm sort of looking over the shoulder a little bit of the line producer to make sure that they're spending it the way that they said they would when they won the bid. I would say that from a budget perspective, that's kind of the difference. And then in terms of people management, which is also a massive part of producing, both kinds of producers care about making everybody happy. You have your client, so the person paying for the thing. you have your director who has their vision that's being executed, and you have your crew. And the line producer, especially, and Bryan's really good at this, he cares deeply about how the crew's experience of the production is going. What is the production company and their people getting out of this experience? What's the director getting out of this experience? The agency producer is the one to say, wait a minute, just remember who's paying for this. They're making sure that their group of people, their creative directors, are also having their needs met. So it's basically just making everybody happy, but you have more of a stake in certain groups of people depending on what kind of a producer you are.
Yeah, and there's different facets of the industry as well, commercial or narrative or what have you. And so depending on which facet we're talking about, the title producer can change and shift.
Yeah.
And there are, other titles that go along with producer, in the commercial realm, which is what, we spend most of our time doing. We do wear a couple hats, definitely the budget being a big part of what we do. But as she mentioned, it's, caring for the people that we're working for, the client and the creative, and pulling, all of it together from a logistic standpoint.
What are you guys working as a freelance duo or a producing team?
We do our best to. It doesn't always happen that way, but yeah, we do our best to often.
What's the advantage? I know you guys kind of obviously know each other's skill sets really well. What's the advantage for people bringing you guys on as a team?
You want me to answer that one?
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. So, like we mentioned, I come from an agency background. Bryan comes from a production background. So we each have, similar skill sets, but we are differentiated in terms of our areas of expertise. So when I'm coming on, I'm not just there thinking about gear like Bryan is. Bryan knows everything there is to know about gear, in my book at least. And he knows crew really well. He's got a huge Rolodex of people that he can call on in pretty much every city in the U.S., a lot of international as well. So we've got the ability to scale up really quickly for whoever we're working with. But from my side of things, client communication, I think, is often a place where production companies can lack. And so having the project management, the ability to write a good email, the ability to listen and lead a call well, I think sometimes, get missed. And so I can bring that client-facing presence, and together we can kind of work and fill each other's gaps. And and we enjoy working together too. So it's hopefully we bring a lot of good positive energy when we're coming to a project.
What she said.
Yeah, I was gonna say probably nothing to add there.
No, that was fantastic.
What do you guys love about film? I know that's more of a broad question, but I'm just curious about that because I personally kind of fell into film. I am an audio engineer by trade, so I studied audio and music, and had buddies in film who would try to rope me into working on their films. And I'm like, no, I want to do music. And I kept saying no. And then eventually okay, I'll help you here. And then I found out it was now I see it as the ultimate medium, but I'm curious how you guys developed a love for film in general.
That's a good question. It's hard to answer because it is so big, but I would say that I'm drawn to the visual medium for sure. It talks about emailing and text and all of that, and coming from a theater background and reading scripts and all of those things. That's not my wheelhouse. I care so much about what I'm seeing. And I think for whatever reason, the visual medium of film, it speaks to me in a way that really nothing else does, where maybe music, speaks to you like that. And I love music too, but for me, it's film. And there's something about it that, I can either grow because I'm seeing a piece of humanity or a piece of culture that maybe I wasn't, aware of before. I'm learning things, or I'm just, feeling emotion, that is related to whatever story I'm watching on the screen. So yeah, it just draws me in.
I feel like for me, the thing I fell in love with film was the way that I get to experience so many different things. Like every project is a completely different problem to solve. And, music in when you narrow in is similar to that, but film combines, I said, the ultimate medium, right? You combine composition and art with technology, right? Like computers and like batteries and there's chips in these things, and sound design and music. And all of these things that just come together to be one thing that brings people together too. And that was it was kind of like an aha where I realized like the thing I love about film is, and the thing that drives me is the people,
Right.
and like the people on set, the people that you're serving, the client, the crew, and then even just the people that you're, buying food from in the city that you're shooting at, right? Like you just get to experience so much of humanity in the world through this work, right?
Yeah, I think there's two sides of it for sure. I mean, there's the behind the scenes, like you mentioned, and that's such an incredible part of it for us, obviously being in it. I love that, for a day I can step into somebody's shoes and understand their world and their profession, at least for a little bit, and kind of see behind the curtain, which is a lot of fun. And sometimes, due to what we do, we get access to places that most people don't get a chance to. And so that's really cool to be kind of an eye on the wall, of that world, whatever that might be. But on the flip side of things, for the viewer, we're able to change people's worldviews, and we're able to really affect people in a way. And maybe they don't take that to heart. Maybe that's just for a moment. But for that moment, they're seeing something that maybe they hadn't experienced or hadn't thought about before.
Yeah, it's empathy.
Yeah.
We get to create empathy or opportunities for empathy because you're experiencing someone else's point of view. And that's what actors do too. I usually look at it through the lens of an actor because I studied acting. And so I think about, as an actor, you're advocating for whatever character that you're taking on. That is your primary role, is to advocate for their needs. And so to watch an actor do their work is compelling to me. And it allows me to sort of step outside of myself and think about other people.
What is a common challenge that you often have to overcome as a producer on a project? Anything come to mind in terms of something that maybe international jobs? There are a lot of issues specifically with that type of job. Do you guys produce all sorts of types of projects? Obviously, each kind of vertical in that does provide unique challenges, but I'm kind of specifically interested in that international aspect where just getting gear into a country and things like that. Like what is that process like, I guess?
Specifically getting gear into a country. Yeah.
Specifically, gear into a country, challenges that come with producing an international project.
For sure. Well, I mean, the number one thing that jumps out to me is everything takes more time. It's we can here in the country we're used to a certain pace for the most part of and what can be done. Internationally, everything just takes more time, and you're also having to remember that you're a guest in that person's country, and so what might be the norm for you, what might be the pace that you're used to isn't the pace that they're used to, and so it's setting expectations with them as a creative partner, whoever you're partnering with locally, but it's also setting expectations for your client and for your team as well, because you are also a guest in their space. So it's finding that middle ground. That's a big one. Moving gear, and that's always tricky. And every place is different. And I mean, every location that I'm thinking about, all these places that I've been to in my mind, but there are cities that are way more equipped, and you can get a lot of your gear locally, and there are great partners to do that. And then there's some places that I've filmed in that are so remote that you do have to bring in a lot of your own stuff with you. And I've traveled with 25, 30, cases, which is crazy. And, you go through the legal process of getting it over borders and all the paperwork that it takes. And, there's a lot of that. Luckily, I work with a lot of fixers on the ground that are local to those areas that know, the process and know how to grease the wheels. And I'm very thankful for their support because that makes our jobs easier. But yeah, it's a challenge for sure. I mean, I've been through lots of security pat downs and questions that have been asked over time.
It's stressful enough just flying, let alone taking 25 cases.
Oh yeah,
that's crazy. Yeah, we travel sometimes as well, and each airline you go on is different. It's and that's sometimes even just like in the country. So I can imagine when you start going through like international checks and certain batteries and and lenses, and gear looks weird on X-ray machines and stuff like that.
Yeah. I've been pulled into a lot of integration rooms over time.
Any specific instances that you could share that stick out in terms of like any scares about like being able to get your camera through or anything like that?
I mean, there's times where, you use a little bit of money to your advantage, that happens sometimes. But yeah, I mean, it's not just the airlines like you mentioned, but sometimes you're flying prop planes because you're hopping between very remote areas, and then weight is an issue. You can't take all of your gear in one run. What do you do? And those are issues that you have to encounter. I know I was filming in Africa a couple years ago and in Kenya, and we had a G&E team, a duo of gaffer and key grip, who were driving the grip truck. And to get from the main city to where we were going, it took us, an hour's flight, if that. It took them a couple days. Man. Because it's not just a straight shot like it would be in the States, with, great highways like we might have. They're going, around and all over the country, it seems like, to get to where we have to be. So you have to think about those things. It's not as simple as, what we're used to.
Grip trucks are notorious for good suspension.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I can imagine just being on like a super long wheelbase on a road that's just really bad with a bunch of C stands in the back, just rattling around, going side to side.
It's wild. And then you show up in a village, and you're pulling out 12 bys and HMIs, and people don't know what to do.
Whoa.
And that's wild too, and most people are very gracious and they're just curious, they're interested, but there are instances where security is an issue, and you have to think about that for the safety of the crew as well as, the people surrounding.
And who's on the hook for kind of smoothing all of those issues over? Yeah,
that's between us and our local producers that we're working with as well. So yeah, it's a lot.
So a lot of people listening are, marketing directors, agency producers, people from a wide variety of backgrounds. What does it look like to maybe begin to engage a producer on a job?
When I worked full-time for an agency, one of my biggest hurdles was getting other stakeholders to trust that I knew what I was talking about. A lot of times there was sticker shock. It costs a lot of money to make a video. I mean, you can do things economically, but it's still a lot of money because you're hiring a lot of people and you're paying for their work for a whole day or 3 whole days or 10 whole days. And then you're filming with expensive gear. So just the cost of doing business is high. And I would get a lot of people saying, well, it can't cost that much money, right? No, it can. Just trust that I have your best interest in mind and that I'm being honest with you about the cost of something. I think actually what I would say to any sort of account person who's leading a client who has a lot of video needs, talk to a producer before you quote the project to your client. The amount of times I would be told, hey, here's how much money we have and here's the thing we want to do. And I'd say, oh, well, we're going to need 3 times that amount to do that kind of concept. And they'd say, well, we already told our client it would only be this much. Like, well, if you had come to me and told me, what you were doing, I would have given you an accurate estimate and it would have saved everybody a big headache. Or we could have said, well, if that's really only the amount of money your client has, how about we augment the concept to fit that budget? So I would say engage a producer from the beginning because that's going to save you a lot of headaches.
Yeah, I 1,000% agree. And I know that, Annie, speaking to the agency side of things, I would say to the production companies out there, the same is true for executive producers that I work with. I'm boots on the ground. I'm working with the crews, daily. So I know what it costs to make these things happen. And at the end of the day, all those little deals and, all those logistic, maneuvers that I'm making, those are the pieces that I'm usually in charge of and not them. They're a little bit removed from it. And so as they're working on bids, I always appreciate the companies that I can speak into bids beforehand and give my 2 cents. Because that's going to save them and me later from a big headache. And the cost of production is increasing, and it doesn't go down; it continues to increase. And so, if we think that we're basing our numbers on 3 years ago, things have changed, and that will continually be the case. So keeping a communication line open to a producer who does know that and has their finger on the pulse, I think, is important.
So it sounds like a lot of times. It's like, chicken before the egg, or I guess like the cart before the horse. I don't know what the right analogy is there, but
For
the,
sure.
the idea of, you don't have to come to us with such a fully fleshed out idea. Come to us with a concept and like let us help workshop that.
Right.
From there, like a lot of headache, like you mentioned, Annie, would be saved just on the front end of, like you said, a just concept, right? Creative dictates everything.
Well, and I would go even further to say that a big problem industry wide is that at the end of the day, we all have to work. Everybody does. And so because of that, production companies and crews and everybody agrees, that we agree to do these projects for less than they really should be, because at the end of the day, we all have to feed our families and eat and all the things, right? And so that drives the market down, because clients and agencies and so forth that are the ones that are giving us those jobs, they think that, oh, well, we did it for that. And that's true, you did. And so if we continually go down that path, that's really not in service of, the people or the creative. And that's something that is kind of something that sticks out in my mind is important.
And that's one of the harder things about being a producer, I would say, because we have a dual mindset. We have to save money for our client, be like, hey, we came in under budget. Congratulations, we just made you more money. But what that is at the expense of is sometimes is at the expense of paying people their full rate. And so when we want to take care of the people that are working for us. And so there's just this kind of competing interest. And I think good producers are ones that can walk that line well. It looks different for every project. There's no one size fits all solution, but a good producer has to think about both sides and know that they're doing their best to service everyone and take care of everyone with the budget that they've been entrusted with.
Yeah, and I think, competition's good, and we should have competition that makes the market, good and fruitful, but we want to be fair as well.
I was just going to ask, like, how you begin to approach that topic. Say you're in a situation where that does happen, and this again is a common thing. Right?
Yeah,
this is a
very common thing.
Yeah, imagine this situation,
Right.
Hypothetical, of course.
Of course.
Where you do have a limited budget. You have an instance where there's a client expectation, and you are on the hook for getting it done, and probably under what it should be done. How do you begin to approach that problem?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's a start by education, and one way to do that is to show in your budget what it really should be, and then discount if we have to move forward with that project and, within the scope that's been created for us. And that, hopefully sends a message of, this is really not what it should be. And we always try to kind of push that, but there's only so much power that we have too, because of that line that we have to walk, as Annie said. So it's really difficult. I think, there are decision makers that are kind of in different realms above us. And ultimately it's the client that is paying, that needs to be educated on what this, kind of content creation costs.
And sometimes there's room to have a conversation around what the scope is. So you can say, hey, I know that you said you have this much for this thing. Reality check, this much can really only afford this kind of concept. And so sometimes there's room to flex. But I agree with Bryan, education's a really big thing. And when I'm freelancing for an agency, especially, they have repeat clients that'll come back and say, well, you did this for us for $50K last time. And I'll say, okay, well, remember when you lost money on that project? You actually didn't make anything. Like, now's the time to start showing them why. So maybe you can give them that discount this time, but put it in your bid that you're minusing the amount of money that you're losing, and write it as a discount.
And that's a one-time deal.
And it's a one-time offer, so that you're being a good client partner, but you're also drawing a line. And I think there's a way to do that respectfully.
For sure.
Yeah, I think the way that I try to approach a situation like that is some sort of compromise, right? Where it's probably not going to be a 1-for-1, but at least there's a little bit of we can do that, but this. And it's just like, even if it's just something that's minuscule compared to what the compromise on their end would be, at least then it's like you're training, right? You're educating is probably a better word. your clients in the process of understanding when we cut something, we lose something.
Mm-hmm.
It's a real impact on the project, right? There's a level of, and it is an interesting thing in the whole agency world with being triple bid and different phases of bidding and all that stuff. That's a whole
we
world.
could talk a lot about that.
And maybe we should, because
Yeah.
that is maybe with the context in which a lot of this happens. But, I think that it is helpful to note, right? Like get it in writing. This is the compromise. We do this. You asked for this amount of deliverables. Those two we can't do for this amount, or that, or in terms of bringing solutions, maybe redirecting budget to say, that one cut down you wanted, you didn't even seem that interested in it, but that's actually costing you X amount. Let's direct that towards the one that will really move the needle, and you can kind of help them drive the ship to something that's really providing value.
Totally.
But what is that process like to be involved in like a triple bid and like different bidding phases as a producer?
Yeah, I often am working along with a production company with an executive producer during that process. And so the companies that I'm close with, often, like I mentioned before, I'm brought into the bid process, which I love because I can, call out those kind of watch outs in the budget specifically. But it's tough. I mean, you're in the game with a lot of other really great, companies and good directors, which is often the kind of the end all be all of those discussions. So it's really tough. And in different, genres, there are kind of a small group of directors, comedy and other genres as well. And so, a lot of those people, even on the other side of the table, are your friends and you know them. And so you want to wish them well as well. But it's a really tough market. What's worse is when the bid's not triple bid and it's 6 companies going against each other, which I had that happen not that long ago. And that does happen. That's, I think that's pointless. As I mentioned before, I think there should be competition. There's healthy competition, but that's getting to a level where it really shouldn't. It shouldn't happen. It's not really servicing anybody at that point.
I would say, I came into this industry, like I said, from the other side of the table, where I'm the one reaching out and saying, hey, Bryan, with such and such production company, can you bid on this project? Are you interested? And because now I've seen the other side of it with line producing, I have some things that I think I would change for when I am agency producing, just in terms of being more transparent about budget thresholds. Now, I will say there's a lot of red tape, especially with the bigger agencies. You're not allowed to say how much you have. So there can be some roadblocks to that. But the more transparent you can be and the more respectful of production companies' time you can be, the better. Because frankly, production companies are spending so much money and resources on these bids, and just the sheer amount of times that you win, like the likelihood of you winning is lower. And so you end up not wasting, but in a sense, wasting a lot of time on things that will never come to fruition. So recognizing that as an agency producer and saying, look, I'm asking a lot from you, but how can I adjust my expectations, knowing that this is, you have a 1 in 3 shot of actually winning, and your time is valuable. You're not just here for me.
Well, and I feel for directors as well.
Oh, for sure.
I'm friends with a lot of directors that I've worked with for, through different production companies over the years. And it's tough because they're kind of putting their heart and soul on paper, and they're doing it over and over and over again. And it's really cutthroat, and it's gotten worse, I think, over time. I know people who haven't worked in months and months because, and they keep going after jobs, but for whatever reason, on the agency side, they're not picking, those bids or rather, those creative treatments. And, it's really, really tough. It can be very disheartening. And so I think that there's been a push in the industry overall, and there have been some, discussion around a fee for directors putting up, that much time and effort into the decks that they create. Sometimes it's 60 plus page decks, that are beautifully done. Sometimes they're putting their own money up, to hire designers to do that for them. So I think that conversation should continue, and there is a world where in the future, maybe that bidding process, there's some funds that are allocated for who's part of that, the final group of, let's say, 3 companies that are going up. Because that's a really tough place to be at.
It's much less grueling process from a production company or director standpoint when you're like, this is we'll at least get something out of this. At least my time will be covered. You don't feel
Right.
You don't go home feeling bad because you just spent 3 days on something that didn't bring any or no guarantee of anything. And of course, some of that's just the nature of the industry. But I do think that even if it was something, even if it wasn't proportionate, if it was half days or whatever, like whatever the amount would be, to just nod to the idea of like we get it, and we and really it also might even benefit the agency to get better ideas, to be able to feel really great about like that they're actually picking the best company for this, because we would like to think that might not impact how much effort you put into a pitch, but when you know what, I can take a day or two and really, really put everything I have into this because I know it, at least there's something there. You're probably going to get overall better creative films, right? Like that, like even just thinking broadly, I don't know if you guys would agree with that, but
I think so, because you have an incentive now to put, that effort in. And generally speaking, I've seen that, from directors, but I have been on a few of those calls where, for whatever reason, maybe because they've had a good year, those directors, they just haven't put in the work. And then the production company suffers at that point because they don't win the bid, and they're relying on that director to sell them. So it goes both ways, but yeah, I definitely feel for directors, generally speaking.
And I can say too, when you are hearing that director's presentation, I know my creative teams are listening to hear if you're actually caring what you're talking about. And if you're not going to get it. Even if you have a really sexy presentation, you don't care, then you're probably not going to win.
Yeah.
No one wants to work with someone who doesn't care.
Right.
No,
matter
even
what it is.
even if the commercial itself isn't all that exciting, it's a diaper commercial. Of course, the director probably doesn't really care, but they need to act like they do.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Or find something that you can hold on to that it does excite you about that.
Yes.
And just
Drill
hold on to
in
that
on
with
it.
all your life.
Exactly.
Well, and I can also, like, in terms of feeling for directors in that instance, I can see how, like, you put your heart and your soul into a pitch, and then it's like, there goes one baby, there goes like the other part of my soul, there goes that idea that I was excited about, and navigating that. How do you handle that as a producer when you do have to cut and you are navigating a director's vision with pressure from the client? How do you approach that?
I will say one of the benefits of working with Bryan and I as a team is that we're able to kind of balance each other out in terms of our perspectives, because we come from different backgrounds, we see things differently, and we're able to usually come up with pretty good solutions because we're taking both sides into account. So that's a little shameless plug there, but
That's good.
Yeah. I mean, other than being really gracious and treading lightly, what would you say, Bryan?
I think, at the end of the day, we all know that we're doing this for somebody else. And it's got to be something that we keep as in perspective, when we're getting into these projects. And I think, generally speaking, directors that we work with are understanding of that. And at the end of the day, it is a diaper commercial, what I mean? Or whatever it might be. That said, creative ideas matter. And it's hard when I've seen it so many times over. And the percentage is unfortunately pretty high. And this goes for a DP, it goes for a director, anybody that's in those kind of leadership roles from a creative standpoint, that you get into the shoot and it gets butchered, whether it's copy that is kind of cringy, or it's the visuals, the cool moments that they had held on to that get cut. Or from a DP's perspective, I mean, there are so many, they're holding on to those key elements as well, because that's what, their name is attached to and what gets them the next job, because they stood out. And oftentimes it's not what they shot, it's oftentimes how the edit is taken care of. And I've seen it so many times over where you get into the editing room and you see, this creative, or at least somewhat creative, concept get really butchered. And that's really sad at the end of the day, because you put yourself into it. Luckily in the commercial game, there's another one in a couple weeks, hopefully. But for some of those people and some of those lead roles, it's not as often as maybe, one of the standard crew members that's going to be on to the next thing in a few days. So it's tough. It's really tough.
Do you guys, pre-production, production, what about post-production? Is a producer involved in that?
They should be. Not always. I mean, a lot of times people are cut out through the process simply because of budget, which I totally understand. It costs money to keep people on for longer. But I think you'd be surprised by how many directors and producers would actually stay on the project as a supervisor. I don't want to say without pay, but at a severely reduced rate, just to make sure that they have some sort of creative say in the
They're
final
giving the
product.
guidance that's needed to the editor to pull something off. Or
I recently produced a couple of spots, and I thought they looked really beautiful when we filmed them. And I said, "Hey, I'd love to provide feedback if there's any opportunity. No need to pay me. Like, I care about the end product. So, like, please feel free to send it my way. I don't want to muddy the waters. I know there's lots of different layers, but I would love to be involved." And, I got the final link, and there are 10 things right off the bat that I could have suggested that are minor tweaks that would have made it so much better. And it's one of those painful moments where you think it could have been good, but it's not. So, I mean, producers are not always kept in the loop, but they should be.
Yeah, they definitely should be. We get the chance here and there, and when we do, it is a fun process to be part of. I will say that I think Annie's better at it than I am. I don't enjoy post as much personally, but some of that has to do with the fact that I've kind of gotten burned over the years with this repeat process of it not turning out the way that we had all hoped. And to be actually able to voice our opinions and provide that guidance, I think would be really useful and be appreciated. I will say a little plug for DPs out there that I do care about. Invite them into the color process. It's so important. Again, one of the things that they get cut out of all the time is as at least being talked to about the color process. And they filmed it to be a certain way and to look a certain way based on
settings that
exactly
would be thinking about the end product. Right?
100%. Yeah. And so when it's brought in and then into the color room, and they're not even, advised.
Oh, this is dark.
Exactly. Bring it up.
That was supposed to be dark.
Exactly.
Maybe. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that's super important too. And I think that in the end, you would actually have a better product often if they had been part of that process as well.
Do you think that it would be helpful? And again, we're like just living in the ideal world, of course, but
Of course.
I think that the producer is in a unique position to even help guide the client in building a post-production budget and who should be involved in that sense too, right? Again, going back to the idea of not just saying, this is our post budget, and then not like talking to a producer about that. Like that's unrealistic. Or, if you did find an extra $1,000 to get it X, Y, or Z into this process, you're going to see an ROI on your $50,000, $100,000, $300,000 investment that might like really pay dividends. Do you think that's another case for bringing producers on in terms of?
Absolutely. Yeah. I would say though that a lot of people think, oh, producer, so you're in charge of everything. And you'd be surprised how little power we have when it comes to a lot of these things. There are so many stakeholders and so many people that we answer to as well. And so, I think there is a lot of influence that we have, and we are in a position to do that. But at the same time, there's a lot of red tape in the way as well.
Well, you're kind of in, like you said, that in between of like, you've got your client and you've got your director, and you've got to say with everybody, but maybe not the ultimate say with anybody. It's like you have the director who's like, ultimately, this is what I'm going to do, figure it out. And then you've got the client who's like, ultimately, I'm paying the bill, so figure it out.
It's kind of the best and the worst place to be at the same time. Yeah.
For sure.
You're at every table.
Right,
Yeah,
essentially.
we have the best and the worst, Jeff.
Yeah.
So are there any specific challenges that you guys see like maybe industry-wide challenges this upcoming year that you're anticipating or are thinking about that you might, that might be on the brink or have maybe seen the last year that you're looking forward to addressing in 2024?
That's a good question. I mentioned this before, and I know we've talked a lot about budget, but the cost of production isn't getting any less. And so back to the education, I think across the board for various entities, educating on the fact that crew rates are going up. And why is it going up? Because the cost of living is going up, et cetera, right down the line. And so that's something that it's a battle we're continually facing. I'm interested to see where the conversation around, the pitch process goes, because I think that would be a great move for the industry as a whole to move toward, so that directors and production companies have at least a little bit of compensation going their way for the time and effort that they're putting in. That would be something I'd be really curious to watch.
Is that done through this? It's not union. How do you? Is that just more like trying to set a trend?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think it's,
here's the industry. Here's the standard process. Let's start redefining that.
Yeah, and I think it's up to the bigger entities to start first, because when you have your small production companies, they're living by every little tiny project that they can get their hands on, often, and so they're not the ones that can afford to do that. But it's from your bigger entities out there to say, okay, this is what we're going to do now, and then everybody follows suit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anything come to mind for you? I know that's a pretty off the cuff question.
Yeah, I mean, I still think we haven't seen all the effects of the strikes. I think with actors especially, seeing rates rising and just being even more aware of what they are entitled to, which is very great. I think it's good for them to be able to advocate for their needs, but that's going to have a ripple effect in terms of how we prepare for it from a crew standpoint, a scheduling standpoint, how many hours we need on set every day to take care of their needs, and how we have to accommodate them in our budgets in a way that maybe they weren't accommodated for before. So that it'll have an effect, and it'll be slow, but I'm interested to see how that works.
Yeah, and for myself personally, I would say I'm always interested in kind of keeping an eye on what the new and latest equipment and technology is that's coming out. And I know a lot of people are talking about AI and all those things right now, and it's going to definitely affect the industry. But how is it going to, and how can we, in positions of some influence, how can we help guide and use those new technologies in a way that is going to be appropriate and protect people, as well as creating what is next, on the horizon.
It's interesting because, and without having a whole nother discussion about AI for an hour and a half,
right.
It's just another tool in a technological, at least right now, a tool in a technological advancement, just as digital cinema cameras cut positions on a set, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have people having to worry about film reels anymore, right? There's still DIT, but it looks differently. We have to adapt to figure out how to serve the client. That provides new opportunities to make things that have never been made before. You have drones, it's on a lot of micro levels. This has been happening. It's interesting. You're saying cost of production keeps going up. We've seen a trend of budget expectations keep going down, though.
Well, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, because I think advertising budgets generally are going down.
They are.
I think especially there's just a different mindset because it's quicker content. It's content that's not going to be used for as long. The idea of evergreen content is harder to find. Everything's social. Everything's snackable, right? It lasts for 10 seconds and then you'll never see it in your feed again. So a client thinks, well, why would I spend a lot of money on something that's 10 seconds long versus a TV commercial that I can run for 8 weeks, So I think just the way that advertisers are thinking about their budgets is changing.
Yeah, and she mentioned social content. That's kind of the buzz right now, right? That's where the focus is.
Lifestyle. What's the word? Obviously, there's a lifestyle. Branded content. Is that the phrase?
For
that
sure.
Sure. Yeah, and so when that's the norm, and we're having to film vertically, and all the things that kind of grind at me a little bit.
You said that, and you were like smiling. It's like your like soul is dead inside.
Yeah,
we have to film vertically.
Exactly, and it happens so much, or at the very least, there's the vertical treatment of the 16:9 that we've shot. That's just the world we live in, and as Annie said, there's a downward trend for sure, just generally in advertising. But I'll go back to what I said earlier. There's also, unfortunately, that you use the term "what chicken or the egg" or the cart before the horse, of how there are people production companies that have to work and say yes to the low budget, and if that happens enough times, that becomes a trend in itself. And if we've got it for that price before, then why can't we do it again? And so there's that balance again between the low budgets that generally are happening in the industry, and then people saying yes, you know.
It's because the people who are making your diaper commercial have to buy your diapers.
Yes.
And they're double what they were last year.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
why is this so much more than last time? It's like, because we have to buy your stuff.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Any like other trends that you guys have seen or are looking forward to this year, maybe more even on the creative or types of shoots that you guys are doing? Obviously the branded content is one that comes to my mind, but I think there's in music, I think I relate a lot of things to music. There's usually like this trend every 10 years where like you'll get like, 80s really polished synthesizer music, and then you'll get like 90s punk, and then you get like Mumford and Sons, and then you get like, so it's like,
Sure.
we kind of tend to pendulum swing in some of this. And I feel like right now, in my opinion, I don't know what you guys think about this, where it seems like we're, a few years ago, there were a lot larger budgets, in terms of the commercial industry. Things were, the advertising budgets were higher. People were it was a race to like the best production quality. And almost now, right there, it's what engagement in humanity, what rawness can we capture that that relates to people in the way that they are used to consuming content.
It's like, can we hire a production company to do this, but we don't want anyone to know that we hired a production company.
Yes.
Like we want it to look like someone did it on their
Yes.
iPhone, but really do it, bigger and better.
And that's not a hypothetical situation.
No,
That's
that
a real
happens all the
conversation.
time.
Part of that before.
Yes.
And, I think consumers can see right through it
For sure.
personally. But yeah.
There's, it follows somewhat nowadays. Unfortunately, it follows somewhat of the social trends. What you see on various social platforms, TikTok or Instagram or what have you. And there has, like you said, been this pendulum swing toward the real and the raw. But it's still being produced at the same time. So yeah, it's a little
Still has to clear legal somehow.
Right. It's a little
Absolutely.
strange. I enjoy the more pieces of the puzzle, the more interesting my job is. So I personally like the larger productions and a more produced production for sure. And I like quality of visual and all that. And so that's where my tastes lie. But there is also with that trend of going more social, if you will. There are technology trends that are connected to that as well. I mean, the cost of some equipment is cheaper than it ever has been in the past.
Right.
When I was 20, I couldn't get my hands on an Alexa Mini or whatever it would have been at the time. So there's a difference now with some of the kids that are coming out of college or that are getting into the industry. They have so many tools at their fingertip. I mean, frankly, the iPhone is incredible compared to what we had back when we were kids. And so
you can buy a $2,000 laptop, $5,000 camera, and make $300,000 doing video.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the idea of shooting on DSLR back in the day, it's nowhere even close to, the raw capabilities that we can do with small cameras. So it's, that goes hand in hand with, the trends for content, I think, because so much more can be done with less to a degree.
For me, I mean, as a producer for a production company, these questions swirl around and we talk about them all the time. I think the antidote to some of this in my brain is, the AI conversation, the budget's getting smaller conversation is providing genuine human value and solutions. Of course, like business is when you provide value to a client and you provide solutions, right? In its essence. But, what makes human creativity so valuable is the humans who have spent the time to invest in themselves to bring solutions and an experience to a client. There's so many things that will never go away. In 10 years from now, who knows what we'll be shooting on? Who knows what we'll be shooting for? Who knows what the platforms this stuff will be seen on will be? But the things that will remain are you're going to need people to manage the project. You're going to need someone to execute a vision. You're going to need someone to do something, to prompt AI or to go shoot something or to shoot the drone out of the sky. I'm just kidding. I just think that like it's almost a reminder and to continually trying to put yourself in your client's shoes and really provide a value outside of like the status quo or perception of what we should be doing. It's almost like go back to square one on every project. Okay, is this the best approach? Is this the best approach? I don't know what you guys think about that.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, when it's advertising that we're talking about, you can't just tell someone to go buy something. There are there are a bunch of options for them to choose from. Whatever you're selling, there's competitors. The only thing that will move them is art. Right? It'll be creativity. It'll be a creative way for you to convince them that your product is better than another product. So you're always going to need video to do that, or some form of creative storytelling to move the needle. Otherwise, you can't just say, "Hey, you need tissues, go buy this brand of tissues." I need to be moved to go buy your brand.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that. I mentioned before that the visual medium of film, it moves me, and it helps me see things differently, et cetera. I kind of use the analogy of I can't stand when I call a company and I get the automated, voice, and then you go through a million prompts to try to get to
Can
a
I
human.
just talk to someone?
Exactly.
I don't care who it is.
Right. And maybe that's just me being old. I don't know, but I can't stand it. Right. And so I think there's always, even with the AI technology that's coming out now, and it's incredible what we're seeing. And obviously it's not there yet, but it will only improve. But there's a level of human interaction with, the visual that is going to bring that, it's going to evoke that kind of emotion. And if that element isn't there, and honestly, I think it's an element of imperfection.
Agreed.
One of the reasons why, if you go back to Star Wars or, any of these iconic IP, films that we can all name, there was an element of it's too perfect and too clean, so let's dirty it up in the animation and all of that they created, and that is what sells it to us. And so I think that, again, the pendulum swing will probably swing a little bit one way, and then we're going to come back to that more human element at some point, because people are excited, and I get that it's something new and fresh, but it'll come back because really what people are after is that human connection in some way.
Definitely. Could talk about this for another 2 hours with you guys because there's so much more that comes to mind, but I think that's a good place to wrap up. Where can people get in touch? What's the best way to reach out if they want to work with you?
Yeah. Go ahead.
We have our individual websites. It's just our first and last name.com. So AnnieVarberg.com, BryanFellows.com.
Yep.
And we work together as a team or separately, but if we can work together as a team, we will. So we'll connect each other.
For sure. Our socials are linked there as well.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I would encourage everybody to reach out if you have production needs and you need their services. So thank you guys for coming on the show. I really appreciate the time and enjoyed the conversation. For everybody else who's watching, please feel free to leave a comment. I think our main comment area that we will be kind of paying attention to will be YouTube. And we actually hope to do like a Q&A section for some of these podcasts in the future. So be on the lookout for a spot to ask some questions, and hopefully we can maybe answer some community questions. But yeah, thanks again, guys. And we'll talk soon.
Thanks for the opportunity.